This is NICU Babies Parent Support with Catherine Whitaker, a podcast from Hand to Hold, a national nonprofit that provides free personalized support, resources, and community before, during, and after a NICU stay. My conversations here will focus on education and personal stories with medical and hospital professionals, counselors, therapists, and NICU moms and dads from across the country. Whether you're preparing for a NICU stay, you're currently there, or you're months and years past your stay, you belong here. The NICU is hard. We're here to help. I'm your host, Catherine Whitaker, the mom of 6 children, including my very own NICU baby, and I'm so honored you're here. Hey y'all, welcome back to the podcast. It is September, and if you didn't know, it is also National NICU Nurses Day in a couple of days. So, I have to talk to a NICU nurse, right? So I really think you're going to love this interview. In fact, I know you will. I was thinking back to all the relationships that we had with our NICU nurses, many of which we still send holiday cards to. All the NICUs. We ended up staying at 2 NICUs. I still send holiday cards to them, still connected to many of them on social media. And the relationship between a patient and the family of a NICU baby and a NICU nurse is unique. I have never experienced a relationship quite like it in the medical community. We had the ability to hang out in the PICU, the pediatric intensive care unit, the intermediate care unit, the general floor. And while we had amazing nurses and doctors in all of those places, the relationships that have sustained us, the ones that we have continued to keep in touch with, are uniquely and beautifully our NICU nurses. So I felt like it was an appropriate week for us to honor the amazingness of NICU nurses, but also to have a conversation with a NICU nurse that could give us maybe a little bit of insight as to what is it that they do, what is that relationship, what makes it so unique. And so I reached out to one of our son's primary care nurses who has done amazing things in the NICU community. And I knew that she not only had the bedside experience, but she also had the teaching and professor experience. And I felt like all of those places and spaces could really be a real benefit to you. So it's such an honor to have my guest today, Dr. Lisa Davenport. She's a former NICU parent, and she's also the director of nursing for Texas Children's NICU in Houston, Texas. Lisa's experience as a NICU bedside nurse for 9 years fueled her passion for becoming a quality-driven and people-centric nursing leader. Additionally, Lisa serves as faculty for Texas Tech Health Science Center School of Nursing. And with that, let's chat. Well, I am so honored. Sometimes I get the chance to interview people that have been a big part of our NICU journey, and today's guest is maybe a huge part of why I do what I do. Lisa, I'm so happy that you're here.
I am just so excited. It is an honor to be here.
We missed it. I didn't put it in the podcast, but just before we started recording, my preemie snuck in the frame and got a chance to see Lisa. Or more importantly, you got to see the preemie because they don't remember. They were too little. So Lisa, I usually ask when I have someone who's in the medical profession, I usually ask this as my first question because I'm always fascinated to know, number one, why nursing is a career choice? And number two, why NICU nursing?
Absolutely. So I have a very unique journey in that NICU is what I wanted to do since I was 3 years old. I actually went with a family member to go visit a family member in the hospital that had a baby. And we looked in the window of the NICU at the time. And I said, I want to do that when I grow up. And my parents said, a pediatrician? And I was like, no, just to take care of the tiny babies. So I actually went and got a pre-med degree, thinking that I wanted to go to medical school. I wanted to be a neonatologist. It's all I ever wanted to do. In high school, I volunteered in the NICU at St. David's in Austin and volunteered there. And just my NICU love just grew even more. I got to college and got in my pre-med degree, and I realized that doctors and nurses have very different roles in the NICU. And my passion truly was around caring for the whole family as a family unit, that I wanted to be there day in and day out for 12 hours at a time, taking care of the same family. And so really nursing is where I can do that and enabled me to do that. I got into nursing and knew immediately NICU was the only place I applied. It's all I ever wanted to do. And here I am 16 years later, still getting to live out my passion every day.
So if I'm doing the math, that means that you were still just a baby nurse when we had you. You
I
seemed not like a baby nurse. Like you totally knew what you were doing. You were focused, you were intentional. I love that we all
Yeah,
grew up together. Look at
we
us now.
did. We did.
Well, I think there are maybe some NICU moms and dads who are listening to this wondering. So they hear NICU, so neonatal intensive care unit nurse, which means that you are specifically assigned to the NICU. How does that differ, Lisa? So a nurse that's maybe in the PICU, so the PD ICU, or the general floor, like a pediatric nurse, like what's specifically unique about a NICU nurse?
Absolutely. So, NICU nurses typically take care of babies that have never left the hospital. So, they are babies that maybe have complications right after they're born, but typically have never left the hospital. There are some exceptions to that. Sometimes we'll take babies that have been home, but not babies that are more than 30 days adjusted age to come back into our unit. So PICU would be the bigger kiddos. And sometimes they do take babies in the pediatric intensive care or PICU. They will take babies there. And certainly in an acute care, like a floor unit, they'll take babies as well. We are really, though, the baby specialists. So oftentimes, even if our babies are in other places of the hospital, they still consult the NICU just because babies are what we do all day, every day.
I would also call y'all the baby whisperers because there were many times that I could not get Luke to do anything. And then I would call the NICU and say, how did y'all do this? Like, I think the first few weeks that we were home, I still had the not nurse number and I would still call and say, I'm still struggling. And y'all were amazing. So if you're walking into the NICU for the first time, so I know a lot of parents don't know that they're going to be in the NICU or they find
Right.
themselves there unexpectedly. What can they expect? I know you were talking about the different roles between a neonatologist and a NICU nurse. Like, if someone's walking into the NICU for the first time, what should they expect from their NICU nurse?
So I think, first and foremost, most parents don't know they're going to have a visit to the NICU when their baby is born. And so that's something that we as NICU nurses recognize. We are not somebody that anybody ever wants to meet.
Yeah.
We are not a place that they ever want to be. And so I think, knowing that we recognize that about them, we see people at their worst every day. So don't worry about that. Don't worry about how you show up that day. Know that NICU can be very overwhelming. When you walk in the door, you're going to hear lots of noises and beeps and machines and lots of talking and lots of people. And it can be a very overwhelming environment. And I think the thing is, ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. There's no question too big or too small. And even if you have to ask the same question 10 times over, we don't mind. We're used to that. We understand that it is a very overwhelming situation for everybody involved. But typically there will be a nurse that will be taking care of your baby. Most nurses now work 12-hour shifts. So you'll have the same nurse that'll be there with you for 12 hours at a time. Day in and day out. Nurses usually, if they're full-time, they work 3 shifts a week. So you'll see kind of the same people rotating in and out, but the nurse would be there for usually 12 hours.
Well, you reminded me of something. It wasn't on my list of things to ask you, but is there a difference between the day NICU nurses and the not NICU nurses? I know you've done both.
Yeah, well, actually, my bedside, I only ever worked night shift, and I loved night shift. I did night shift for 9 years, and I loved it. And there is a difference, and everybody is trained equally the same, but I think the culture is just a little bit different. The reason that I loved being a night shift NICU nurse was that really a lot of the doctors and everything, they were not in and out of there at night. So we really were able to spend good quality time with the babies and with the families, working on education and bonding. And we didn't have a bunch of tests being run typically and those types of things at night. So I would say, I loved it. I loved night shift and just every now and then we get a little snuggle in with the babies on a good night. So that was always fun.
So I have y'all to blame as to why Luke would not sleep anywhere else
Absolutely.
except my arms.
Absolutely. We spoil them.
No, I think every time I called, I was like, "Are you holding him right now? Because he is supposed to be asleep."
Yes,
Oh my
yes.
gosh. So sometimes we'll hear things like primary nurse. So we'll hear NICU nurse, but then we'll hear, "Oh, that was his primary," or "Can you be a primary?" So maybe explain to people. I know that was a brand new term for me. I didn't know what that meant. So what is a
Yeah.
primary NICU nurse and what does she do or he do?
So, a primary NICU nurse really is a relationship between a family and a nurse, and particularly for babies that are in the NICU for a long period of time. It's really important for you to have that continuity of care, meaning that you have somebody that knows your baby inside and out, that knows their quirks, knows they just don't look right today because they've taken care of them so much. And so, primary nursing, I will say, is something that's pretty unique to the NICU environment because our patients do tend to stay for a long time. And it's something, like I said, I mentioned the word relationship because it is a relationship. And it's something that you would need from both the family and from the nurse's side. And whenever you find somebody that you really click with, you can always ask them if they would be a primary nurse for you. And typically, units will only let them have one primary at a time. So, they may already have another primary, but whenever you enter the NICU and you start having different nurses, be on the lookout for somebody that you really feel like you bond with, that you feel really comfortable leaving and going home at night and getting some rest in your own bed. And you can always ask them to be a primary nurse.
Yeah, I know that there were a lot of times that I was really apprehensive about leaving, but then when I knew that a certain NICU nurse was there that night or that day, I felt like this big exhale, like, okay, I know that he's in good hands. I know that someone loves him, maybe not as much as I do, but pretty darn close.
Pretty
Y'all
close.
y'all knew him well, and I think that brought me a lot of peace. So I hope that people, when they listen to that, that every baby is unique, every NICU nurse is unique in how they interact. I think they're all, at least our experience was by and large, 9 out of 10 nurses that we had were attentive and amazing and wonderful. So I know that a lot of times it's just like finding the exact perfect fit for that. But I know it can be a real benefit to a family, peace wise, to walk out those doors when they have to leave, knowing that their baby's in good hands. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier. We were talking about that I would call the NICU nurses. I mean, it's not a normal thing. Like normally you don't go in for surgery and then call like the surgical nurse. Um, I don't know if it was unique to me, but I know that every night when I would be up pumping, usually 3 a.m. was usually when I set my alarm to pump. It was really hard to get up, but also I was like, I need my milk to come in. So I would have a tendency to call you guys and say, like, can you make Luke, like, put him on the phone and make some noises, so I can
Oh.
hear his voice. And y'all were always so good about that. I mean, Lisa, what's the access like when you are out of the NICU, but your baby's still there? What does that look like for most families in a NICU setting with their NICU nurse?
So, as far as if the baby's still admitted, but mom's at
Yes,
home.
right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, the important thing to remember is you should always call and check on your baby. And I think nurses never mind that. We all recognize if that was our baby, we'd be calling and checking as well. I think that the really great thing, technology is wonderful. And I think something that's been great about COVID, if there's a good thing that came out of it, is that a lot of hospitals now are moving towards having these cameras in the NICU
Yeah.
that parents can actually see their baby from home. And not all NICUs have them yet, but it is technology that is available. And a lot of hospitals are starting to move that direction for just the reasons that you said, Catherine. One of the things is, breast milk production, right? And being separated from your baby, you don't have that smell of your baby and everything at home. And so even to be able to pull up a picture of your baby at home and watch the live stream is fantastic. But I would say, even if your hospital doesn't have that, to have a picture of your baby at home, call and check anytime you want. The nurses welcome that. And then also, take a blanket home. Ask the nurse if you can have one of the blankets that's been in your baby's bed and take that home. And whenever you're pumping, put that over you. And it smells like your baby. And conversely, leave things with your baby that smell like you. And then that helps build that bond.
I did always bring blankets home from the NICU, but I don't know that I ever thought to leave something that smelled like me. I guess I just always assumed because I held him as much as I could when they would let me that he just
Yeah.
smelled like me all the time. I don't know if he smelled as much like my husband. I was definitely the baby snuggler. Um, so I know, Lisa, sometimes, and I mentioned this, like most of our nurses that we had were a really good fit for our family. But I know sometimes there might be a family that gets into a NICU setting, and for whatever reason, it can be personality, it can be maybe the diagnosis of the baby, like it's just not gelling, and a family maybe doesn't feel like they're getting the best care that they can get for their baby.
Right.
What is your suggestion to a family that is maybe struggling in a relationship with a NICU nurse or feels like maybe this other nurse might be a better fit? How do they fix that? What do they do?
Yeah. So I think it's really challenging and something in my role now that I have to handle and navigate. And the way I always explain it to both families and nurses is, you think about if you go to a job and you work at a job, you're not always going to like everybody. Not everybody's personalities mesh. And often it has nothing to do with the skill set of the nurse. It really just has to deal with sometimes personalities or communication styles just don't mesh. And so, I always encourage families to have an open conversation with their nurse. If they feel like there's something that's just not right, always have an open conversation with the nurse about it. If that's uncomfortable for you or you don't feel like that's going well, you can always ask to speak to the charge nurse. Typically they are the ones that are a constant in the unit and well adept at being able to navigate these issues with families. Certainly sometimes it goes beyond that. Sometimes the charge nurses are like, oh, I don't know how best to navigate this. And so then it can go into the leadership team. And the title of that leadership team may differ depending on where you are, but a manager type role would be able to step in and be able to help navigate it. We typically try to work things out because, all of our nurses are able to care for our babies. But I would say primary nursing is really your best way to try to form those relationships and keep that consistency of care where you are. There is a very, very off occasion that sometimes we just have to say, this really just isn't working out for either side. And so very rarely will we make that. Usually we can come to some kind of agreement before then. But sometimes we just have to say, I think this just isn't the best fit. But it's something that we're always open to a conversation with leadership. So just make sure you kind of go to the charge nurse first is usually the first line.
Yeah. What's the chain of command on the NICU? Charge nurse?
Yeah. Charge nurse would be the first line. Yes. And then, like I said, depending on where you are, there's multiple layers. Where I am, there's multiple layers beyond that, but it just kind of depends. But charge nurse, and then you could ask for a manager beyond that.
Yeah. We loved our charge nurse. She was amazing. She had a lot of babies on that floor. So they have a really important job of making sure that babies are cared for. I know that you said they're all equipped. Some babies give you surprises and you never know what they're going to do. And I always felt like we were in good hands. I mean, I felt like they had a good handle on that. This podcast is produced by Hand to Hold, a national nonprofit, but we're more than simply a podcast. Be sure to download our app, join one of our support groups, or find one-to-one support, enjoy counseling, find loss and bereavement support, participate in a peer-to-peer mentor program, or check out our news, articles, and family stories at handtohold.org. All of that is at no cost to you. Hand to Hold's mission is to provide personalized support before, during, and after a NICU stay to help ensure that all NICU families thrive. Yeah, you definitely have amazing clinical experience back in the day when we were babies back then, and you were back at the bedside, but I know that your role has shifted a little bit since then. So when you are working with your staff, whether it be nurses or people who educate nurses, what are some things that you sort of charge them with to say, okay, as a NICU nurse, these are some things like best practices that you should be using with your patients?
Absolutely. So, I think the thing that I always try to instill in them first and foremost is to never lose the passion, the excitement when they come out of nursing school. And I often, when they're in orientation and I go to meet them and I tell them, remember how excited you are right now and carry that forward with you throughout your entire career. There's going to be ups and there's going to be downs, but carry that. And the biggest thing beyond that, and I've always said that, that every single baby that's in our care is somebody's hopes and dreams. And they are entrusting their hopes and dreams to us. And if you keep that in sight, then everything else comes easy. When a situation may be challenging, but that is somebody's hopes and dreams that they've entrusted to you. When there's a strained relationship, maybe with a family, that's somebody's hopes and dreams. When you've had a bad day, check it at the door because that's somebody's hopes and dreams. And so I think if you keep that in check, then everything else follows. And then, I am probably one of the biggest proponents for my profession. I am very passionate about my profession. I'm very passionate about elevating professionalism in nursing and in neonatal nursing. And so really just encouraging them to dive in and to get involved, first at the hospital level, to join committees, to really get involved and get to know families really well. And then beyond that, to get advanced degrees in nursing, and then start working on really advancing neonatal practice across the nation, I think is really important. And it's our obligation to our patients to do that.
Well, it certainly changed a lot. I mean, I know that in the 14 years since we've been in the NICU, I know we were just talking about now there's cameras. When a neonatologist told me that the other day, and I got to admit, I was a little jealous because I would have loved to have had a camera on
Me
Luke. But
too.
what what's the biggest change that you've seen over these last 16 years being involved in NICU nursing that you think has been a huge benefit in the profession?
I think there's so many advances from a medical standpoint, things that I never thought that I would see. The fact that we're able to successfully save 22-week babies. I never
Yeah.
thought that I would see the day that we were doing that. There are things that we are able to do now for babies that are born, with, either no kidneys or, kidneys that don't function very much, with dialysis, that we weren't able to do. And that oftentimes we didn't really have a solution for the families when I started nursing. And now we're able to successfully watch these kiddos grow up. And it's just really, truly incredible. And then the other thing too is really just the nursing driven practice, and the things that we understand now about from a developmental care perspective, and how we really are driving that care for babies and neuroprotection, protecting their little brains, in all that we do and all the care that we provide. It really has come so far. We understand so much. There's still so much to be understood, but we really have come so far just in my time of being a nurse.
Well, what a gift to know that babies that we couldn't save yesterday, we can save today.
It's
And
amazing.
then in 15 years, how many more babies and not just survive, but that they have a real exceptional quality of life. And those we
Absolutely.
talk about people's hopes and dreams. I know that that's a lot of dreams of a lot of mamas listening to this. So the golden hour has become like this topic of conversation of what do we do in this golden hour. I know you spent a little bit of time researching
Yeah.
that, so maybe tell us a little bit about what makes the hour so golden.
Absolutely. So the golden hour is particularly important for micro preemies. So, babies that are born less than 28 weeks, less than 30 weeks gestation, depending on where you are. But that first hour of life is really critical. There's a lot that you have to do. And then ultimately, your ultimate goal is you want to let that baby rest, for their brain, for neuroprotection, so that they can get nice and warm in their isolate. There's a lot of things that have to happen in that first hour. So it's like a dance. You have to have everybody choreographed to be able to come in and step in. Of course, babies that are born that early, they need glucose. They need sugar through their IV. So you have to be able to establish IV access, which is not always easy in a small
Yeah.
baby. So to be able to get that IV access established, to be able to any x-rays that they need to have, go ahead and get that done. But ultimately, whenever they're put into that isolate, to get that top of the isolate closed by 1 hour is the ultimate goal, so that they can just go to sleep and they can rest. And evidence definitely shows that by doing that, that they have better outcomes, from a neuroprotection standpoint. So as far as when you think about like IVH or brain bleeds, those types of things are reduced if you really are able to get those babies stabilized. The other part to that too is that I'm going to use big words here, thermoregulation. But ultimately what that really means is just making the baby warm, that the baby has been nice and warm inside of mom, and then they come out and they are, even if they're on a warmer, they still are in this cold environment. And so we want to get them nice in a nice, quiet, cozy, warm environment, just like they're back inside of mom, as well, so that they're not using up all of their storage of fat.
Well, you're making me think. So about a month ago, we did It's our other podcast, NICU Heroes, where we sort of interview NICU professionals. They can get CEU credits, which is amazing. And Dr. Katheri and I were talking about this very thing. He was talking about delayed cord clamping, but how he wheels the baby basically right over mom's belly. He was talking particularly after a C-section and how they
Right.
were doing things to delay that because of just the immense amount of stem cells that are still transferred in that, 8, 9, 10-minute period. And he talked a lot about this hour is so precious. And I mean, I think we knew that, but I think when you have evidence-based things that say, no, like this is what's happening when we do that, it's really encouraging, Lisa, too, to think if you combine that technology with the advances that we make in medicine, like what could that hour look like in 5 years or 10 years? Like, I don't know.
Absolutely.
It's really exciting is when I think about babies. I'm just as
Absolutely.
passionate as you are. So if you had to name best part of being a NICU nurse and then the most challenging part of being a NICU nurse, what would you say?
So, hands down, the best part is the bonds that I get to build with families, and families just like you. To be able to watch these kids grow up is the most rewarding thing, and it's my why. It is why I get up every morning, and truthfully, in my role now, I'm a director over a very large unit with lots of staff, and but that's still my why. And I cherish any opportunity that I get to talk to families, to talk to the nurses. And it really is just an honor to get to have a small part to their story. I think that the worst part is that sometimes the outcomes are not what we want them to be.
Yeah.
And despite everything that we do, despite all the medical advances, that part never gets easier. Is losing patients, and
Yeah.
um, we come to love them just like they're our own. And so, even many years later, there are still babies that I think of often, that I pray for often for their families, because they took a part of my heart with them. And so I would say that that's the worst thing. But I think people would, whenever you tell them you're a NICU nurse, people think, "Oh goodness, you get to cuddle with babies all day. Isn't that lovely?" And I always tell people that's a good day that I get to do that, and
Yeah.
that my good days are very, very good, and my bad days are very, very bad. But the good days outweigh the bad. And so I think holding on to those relationships that I've gotten to build with the families, and it's really truly a blessing. Every family that's come in my unit, that I have been able to interact with, it's just really been a blessing.
Well, I can certainly speak to while the outcome ended up being better than we thought it would be with Luke, we still had some really hard days. And I would suspect that if you were a NICU mom or dad listening to this, it's a little bit like a
Right.
roller coaster. And maybe you're listening to this on a bad day. I can say that it was NICU nurses, even though we had amazing neonatologists, we had amazing specialists, really and truly with our son. It was the NICU nurses who would walk in the door after we would get a bad diagnosis and they would just like sit with us. And it was so comforting to have somebody who really did get it. Like I didn't have to explain like, "Oh, this is why this is hard," or "Oh, this is why we're upset," or "Oh, this is why I feel challenged," because y'all knew. And so I know that even on the bad days, y'all are still a bright spot for families. And I think I can look back on those days and be really grateful that someone understood and I did not have to say anything and they still got it. So
Absolutely. And
you were
it's
you were in
such an
there.
honor. It's such an honor with these families. And in my position now, sometimes families are, they're having a hard time,
Yeah.
and I get the opportunity to sit down with them. And at the root of everything, this is not what they had planned. This is not the news
Yeah.
they wanted to hear. This is not where they want to be. They didn't want to be there that long. And just for me to be able to sit down with them and tell them I understand. I was a NICU mom myself, and I think that plays a big role in who I am as a NICU nurse, because I've been there, and I can absolutely empathize with everything that they are going through, and really to be able to just listen. Like, because sometimes that's all they need is just somebody to
Yeah.
listen. I may not have the answers, but to be able to listen, is a gift that I can give them.
Well, I can attest from personal experience. You did it well. Um, I always ask this is my last question because I love hearing people's advice. So, Lisa, if someone finds themselves in the NICU unexpectedly or expectedly, what is your best advice to them to utilize their NICU nurse in the best way so that they can walk out of those NICU doors maybe with a little bit less trauma and a lot more peace?
Yes. And I think I mentioned this earlier, but I'm going to say it again. Ask questions. Ask questions and really seek to understand what's going on with your baby. A lot of times the doctors will, or the nurse practitioners will come in and they'll talk of all these big words during rounds. And sometimes the families are afraid to ask what it really means or what
Yeah.
the implications of it are. And don't hesitate you're welcome to ask them too. But when they walk out and you start thinking, oh gosh, well, I didn't really understand what they said, ask the nurse and also ask the nurse about what your baby's routine is. I think that the most important thing is that you're still the parent. And
Yeah.
and sometimes people forget that, or they don't feel comfortable touching their baby or doing things. And I would say be a part of your baby's care and ask the nurse, what can I do for my baby today? Can I change the diaper? Can I take the temperature? And depending on how your baby is, there may be a couple things you can do, or there may be a lot of things that you can do, but don't hesitate to ask because that is still your baby. And we just get to be a part of your lives for a little while, but you're the one that's going to take that baby home. So you need to work to build that bond with your family. And I think the other thing, my last statement is ask to hold your baby. Because there are times that you may not be able to, but we try to get babies in mom's arms and not dad's too, but we try to get babies into their parents' arms as soon as possible. And even though there's a lot of equipment and it may look very, very intimidating, it doesn't hurt just to ask the question because oftentimes the babies need that as much as the moms and dads do to be able to just hold their baby.
That's such good advice. Lisa, I could spend another hour talking to you, but thank you, I think, for giving people some, I think, really good practical ways of which they can really get to know their NICU nurse, utilize their NICU nurse, but maybe put at ease their mind about someone that really does care deeply about their family and about their baby. And it was such a joy to visit with you. So thank you.
Thank you so much. It is such an honor to be able to be here.
Well, I hope y'all enjoyed that conversation and that advice as much as I did. I love our NICU nurses. It was really, I know I mentioned this in the interview, but just before we started, my preemie walked into the frame and Lisa got to see him. And I just keep thinking of how far we have come these last 14 years and that those NICU nurses were the first people that helped us navigate the hardest valley of our life. They were with us every day and every night. So, in today's 2-minute take, I think I first want to say to every NICU nurse who is listening to this, thank you for the gift of yourself. Thank you for being present to NICU families and the really joyful, like, we did it moments. And more importantly, thank you for being with us when the news is not at all what we expected. I think that was the thing that really resonated with me the most is when Lisa was talking about what she shares with those who are either educating NICU nurses or NICU nurses themselves is that's somebody's hopes and dreams. So whatever you bring with you to the NICU that day personally, check it at the door because those people that you are loving, those people that you are helping and assisting, those are people's hopes and dreams. And I found that to be true with the vast majority of our NICU nurses is that they remembered us in the really difficult moments. They didn't try to, they didn't try to happy clap us out of it. They didn't try to give us platitudes to say like, oh, tomorrow's going to be a better day. Like they just were present. And I think that is a unique gift. I think it's a real calling that I found in each one of our NICU nurses is that they were really, really good at being present. They were also really good at pushing us on the days that we needed to be pushed, of giving us some encouragement on the days that we needed it, reminding us like, hey, I know this thing is really hard, but look at what your baby is doing today that they were not doing, in the last shift that I was here. So I am indebted to our NICU nurses. I hope that today's episode gave you a lot of I think just a lot of really practical wisdom of how you can best utilize your NICU nurse, but also to know that you are in a unique club of people that maybe you didn't want to be here, but the company that you keep in the NICU, particularly with nurses, can be the balm that helps you get from one hard day to the next. So with that, I will see y'all next time. Thanks y'all for listening to NICU Babies Parent Support. Every parent and every experience is welcome here. If you are a NICU parent and you're finding yourself in need of support, please download our app. You can find it in the Apple Store or on Google Play, Hand to Hold. And if you love today's episode, you can share it, you can subscribe, and you can most certainly review it. We would love, love, love your reviews. It's how we reach more NICU parents. Thanks, and I'll see y'all next time.